Hi, this is Magda from Wnętrza Zewnętrza, welcoming you to a renovation-themed episode. I probably shouldn't walk around too much during the video because there's rubble everywhere here and I'm afraid it's going to be very loud on the recording. So I'll try not to move around too much, but I want to show you what's going on here because this is one of my favorite stages of renovation. I think my absolute favorite is painting, but demolition and chipping off plaster are also very satisfying. Of course, it all depends on the circumstances. It's satisfying in apartments where the plaster is actually in very bad condition, in places where the plaster is in bad shape, because then I feel like it really needs to be replaced. If I had to do it in an apartment that is generally suitable for living, but someone just wants it to look different, that would already be difficult for me, because the issue of generating waste during renovation is generally hard for me. So I try to act in a way that only the really necessary waste is produced. And whatever can be reused, I try to find a way to use it somehow. So actually a lot of my time during the renovation goes to that. Contrary to what you might think, a lot of it is actually posting ads for various things on Śmieciarka or on OLX, so that someone can just pick up different things and give them a second life. And it might seem like, oh, you just post it, but no, it actually takes some time. People call, ask questions, and write messages. And to reply to all those different messages, to list each item in different categories so they have a better chance of being picked up, well, whether you want to or not, it takes some time. It's not like I spend the whole day on my phone, definitely not, but sometimes you do have to take your phone out. So in a way, I understand people who are in a hurry and just want to get rid of everything and be done with it because it's simpler. Really, I'm aware of that, but I encourage you not to always go for the simplest solutions, because sometimes simpler doesn't necessarily mean better. That's usually the case, actually. There was once a separate kitchen where I'm standing now. It didn't have direct access to a window, but there was a small window near the ceiling, so a little bit of daylight came in, but it was definitely still a very dark room. And here on the other side of the entrance there was a bathroom, and the bathroom will still be here. Because here we have all the drains and connections, and we will move the kitchen to the living room as a kitchenette. I know some people can't stand this solution, but there's nothing I can do about it. However, we don't want these pipes here by the entrance. There used to be a threshold built here, and yes, we could leave such a threshold. It wasn't particularly inconvenient because these passageways are quite specific anyway, so the unevenness in the floor doesn't really bother us that much. However, it will be simpler to just do all the plumbing in one corner of the apartment. And I care more about separating apart for storage and sleeping so that there is a comfortable mattress and a comfortable bed. It's high here, so I hope to make it work and it won't be a loft bed. Because that has a lot of drawbacks, but honestly, what am I even telling you? It's not even time to be thinking about that yet. For now, just look at what's happening here with the walls, because in some places the walls were holding up pretty well. Of course, if you tapped them, you could hear that hollow sound, but overall the plaster was staying on. But there were places where just by removing the wallpaper, the whole surface would come off right down to the brick. And both in the kitchen and in the bathroom there was wallpaper on the walls, because what you see here are not tiles. See, actually, maybe I should do this with a glove because everything here is very dirty. The apartment stood empty for many years and that's the worst. I mean, an apartment can be in better or worse condition, but when it stands empty, it's just a shame that such a space goes to waste when someone could be living here. Oh, look at this. These tiles are coming off, it's just an imitation. From a distance you could really be fooled, but there's definitely less mess when removing this kind of wallpaper than when removing real tiles. Do I recommend wallpaper instead of tiles for the bathroom? Not necessarily, but obviously it was just a cheaper solution. But don't think that this is a cheaper solution, not in general, because modern wallpapers that are used in bathrooms, for example, in the shower, which are so highly resistant to moisture that they can be used in the wettest areas, are actually not such a cheap solution, and surprisingly, it's cheaper to lay tiles. Applying all those layers that protect the wallpaper so it can have direct contact with water. Not only is it time-consuming in itself and requires different adhesives, varnishes, and applying materials, but also it simply takes a long time. It's not like you can apply the next layer right after the first one, so the specialist has to come several times. Applying all the layers that protect it, you can't just apply the next one right away, so the specialist has to come several times. And of course, every visit to the client is simply a cost. So installing such wallpaper in the bathroom is definitely a premium solution. It gives a nice effect, and it's definitely worth considering if you have a bigger budget. It gives a nice effect, and it's definitely worth considering. It's different if we're talking about dry areas, but again, it simply takes time.
Przy remoncie, ale
Application.
mówimy o częściach suchych, wtedy nie ma tak.
Applying the layers that protect the wallpaper is time-consuming, especially since in the dry part it doesn't require as much work. But in general, applying all the layers that protect the wallpaper and give it such high durability simply takes time and requires different adhesives. It's a very difficult task, of course not at every stage, but definitely when chipping off the plaster, because there's just so much dust everywhere. And as you know, dust and electronics are not the best combination, and I would prefer my camera to survive this encounter. Fortunately, the previous round of chipping off the plaster took place just last week. Then the apartment just sat there. Everything settled down nicely, so now before I get to work, I'm recording these few shots. And then I'll put the camera in its case, the case in my backpack, the backpack in a bag, and I hope everything will be fine. And here, look, there's still some rubble left by the wall from the last time we chipped off the plaster. Walking on it is a bit like walking on snow in winter, so it's kind of funny. But I want to show you, I don't know if you'll be able to see it well, but oh, it's not focusing at all on what I want, just on my face. Maybe it'll work like this? Can you see it? Can you see anything? And look, it just falls apart in your hands into powder, really. Oh, I don't like doing this without gloves because then your hands feel, you know, kind of gross afterward. Unfortunately, last time we ended up stripping off the plaster a little too spontaneously. We knew we wanted to do it in the kitchen and bathroom because the plaster was the weakest there, but in the room we were rather in favor of leaving it. But when we were removing the wallpaper on that wall, it turned out that in that spot in the room, the plaster wasn't holding well either. And when I started uncovering the brick, because it just crumbled when we were removing the wallpaper, we decided that if we're going to do a full renovation, we might as well go all in. And there's no point in being too gentle with these walls. Because even if they're okay now, they'll probably last a few years, but maybe not until the next major renovation. And you know, the dust is the worst part, so let's just get it all done at once now and be done with it. And that's a good approach. It's definitely the right approach, but we just didn't think about it that way before. Because of that, when we removed the wallpaper, the wall came off in one spot, but in the living room, it's not coming off as easily. But still, some of it managed to get everywhere, so we didn't put things away as well as we should have. We just threw the most important stuff onto the sofa and covered it. And so, a lot of things were left out, so now everything is covered in dust. It's tough, but, well, that's just how it goes sometimes. I was so focused on the plaster that I didn't even think about the things lying behind me and that they would get dusty, so it's too late now. Cleaning up that dust later will be much harder than it could have been, but well, you live and learn. Sometimes emotions get the better of you, even during renovations. And we'll see what happens next with this. Because of that, new possibilities are opening up regarding leaving the brick in different places. Because if we didn't plan to chip off the plaster somewhere, then it was clear there wouldn't be any brick there. But since it's already exposed, maybe it's worth considering. And just like I always encourage you to think through the whole project before the renovation, I still stand by that. However, when it comes to more decorative issues like chipping off the plaster and leaving the brick exposed, it's clear that it's not that important. And it's more about thinking through all the different clearances so that we don't end up building a partition wall and then realize that the bathroom fixtures don't fit. And if we moved that wall just a little bit, which wouldn't really matter, everything would fit. So things like that do matter. And of course, I realize that not everything, and it's not so easy to think of everything in advance, because without experience, sometimes we just might not think of something. And that's just a normal human thing. That's how renovations are, which is why it's easier to work with experienced professionals. But when that's not possible, well, what can you do? It's worth taking some time with a piece of paper, with a floor plan, to talk about what options we have, to look through different fixtures and fittings, to sketch things out, because that will help us avoid various mistakes. Some things just can't be fully thought through in 5 minutes. It's better if these aren't spontaneous decisions, but of course don't beat yourself up if something doesn't work out, because that's normal. What's important is how we deal with those slip-ups afterwards, not that we never have them, because honestly it's almost impossible for that to happen. Slip-ups happen to professionals too, because that's just life. Renovation, furnishing an apartment, there's just too much going on to wrap your head around it all in one go. No, it's easy to overlook something here, easy to forget about something, that's normal. But fortunately, you can always improve your apartment, so all is not lost, most of the time. So, okay, all is not lost, but seriously. Set aside a lot of time for designing, planning, and thinking things through, because the more mistakes you manage to avoid, the cheaper it will be. That's life. Once I've finished chipping off the rest of the plaster and taking out all the rubble, I'll tidy up here. Then the next step will be laying OSB boards for the bathroom floor and putting up partition walls. And that's a very difficult task. But it's challenging in a very different way from removing the plaster. Because chipping off the plaster involves some effort. At some point your arm might start to hurt, it can get tough, you get tired because the rubble is just heavy and you have to walk to the big bag, since it couldn't be placed under the window to throw it down the chute, so it would just fall down there. Well, that's how it is. You have to deal with that exertion. But it doesn't really require much thinking. It doesn't carry much responsibility. Of course, you have to be careful not to break any cables while chiseling. But overall, it's not very mentally demanding. As for the walls and the floor, you have to be more careful here to make sure everything is even and holds together well. Because every small mistake at this stage can have serious consequences later. If the wall is crooked, it will be hard to hang or attach anything to it later. Tiling will be harder later. If the size is wrong, something might not fit later. Well, this kind of work carries more responsibility. It's a bit stressful, especially if you have minimal experience in this area like I do, and by minimal I mean almost none. Because when you do it with someone who is experienced, the responsibility is really on that other person, not on me. And here I'll have a more important role, but fortunately I won't be doing it alone either. But today I'll definitely be chipping off the plaster by myself. And that's why this video could be made, because if I start working a little later, it's not such a big deal. But if I'm holding up the work of another person, or even a few people, then that's a real problem. So recording the renovation, unfortunately, is a bit of a hassle. Because honestly, when I started working on renovations, I thought, great, because I thought I'd have some cool content for you too. I'll be able to show you different things, how we do them. And a lot happens during a renovation, and there are all kinds of emotions, right? A mishap here, a mini meltdown there, things like that. That could make for some cool videos. But I'm not working alone. Or if I'm doing a job for a client and someone is paying me by the hour, then I can't be making my own content during that time, because that's not what I'm being paid for. And you can't just record a video, you know, on the side. So, well, my plan went out the window, but that's okay. I'm gaining experience. And I can share it with you through other content too. That's it for this video. I look forward to your comments and likes. And see you next time. Bye.